right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the podcast. With me, I have three individuals from the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League joining us today. I have Jeff Swampy Kabasinski from the Diamond State Baseball Club located in Delaware. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. And then we have Tom Big Bat Fasalowicz from the Mutual Baseball Club based in New York. Tom, thanks for coming.
Glad to be here.
And we have Rick Stonewall Stratton from the Brandywine Baseball Club in Pennsylvania. Rick, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks for having us.
Now, Rick, you were the one that initially reached out. I believe it was through Instagram, and we started the conversation about having members of your league come on the show. It was great starting that conversation with you. I've really enjoyed these interviews that I've had with members of the vintage baseball world. You know, we had a group from the SoCal Vintage Baseball League come on. We had a group from the Central Valley Vintage Baseball Association come on. So it's been great. So, guys, I'm looking forward to hearing about how things are done in your neck of the woods, because we've done a lot on the West Coast. We've yet to go to the East Coast. So, I guess starting off, guys, are you all East Coast born and raised? I know Rick said you grew up in New Hampshire, right?
That's correct. This is Rick Stratton. Yes, I grew up in New Hampshire and moved to the suburban Philadelphia area in 2003 and have been living here ever since. I'm an East Coast guy back to the beginning. And
Tom, are you an East Coast born and raised gentleman as well?
Born and raised in New York, lived in Cincinnati for 10 years on my own, go to school, and happy to be back in New York.
Now, Tom, who do you align yourself with? Are you Yankees or Mets there for New York fandom?
Strange as it may seem, I'm a Dodgers fan.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't see that coming. Very interesting. Was that born out of anything in particular?
Steve Garvey, a big Steve Garvey fan.
Got it. Okay. Very good. And then Jeff, same question for you. Are you an East Coast guy as well?
I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan. I moved out east in about 2003.
Now, Delaware is kind of a wild card in terms of who you cheer for. Who's your MLB team that you follow?
Well, my MLB team is the Tigers. It's been a rough year for the Tigers fans, but most of my teammates are Phillies fans.
Got it.
If you get into downstate Delaware, you'll find some Orioles fans down that way.
Yep.
But northern Delaware is all Phillies fans.
Interesting. I've always wondered which way Delaware goes. You answered my question. I appreciate that. So, guys, obviously you are involved in vintage baseball currently. Sounds like you're all obviously fans of the MLB as well, baseball. I grew up in Massachusetts cheering for the Red Sox. I'm here in Florida now. It's hard to adopt the Marlins as my second team just because they're so horrible every year. But I try to look at it as
you don't cheer for the Rays.
The Rays I could. There's that joke, and it's true. Tampa Bay is kind of like Boston Junior. The Red Sox farm club in some ways, because whenever the Sox go play the Rays there, half the stadium's filled with Red Sox fans. It's all the snowbirds that go down for the winter. So I could do the Rays. It's just the nice thing is I'm 30 minutes from the stadium here in Miami, and it's cheap tickets. At least it's very easy to get in and get that $5 ticket and then move up close. But the competition's a little bit wanting, so we'll see if they can improve. So, guys, why don't we go ahead and jump into it? I'd love to hear about your stories as to obviously a lot of people that listen to the show are baseball fans. Vintage baseball is a bit of a different animal, just in terms of rules you play by. There's a commitment to it because there's a historical aspect. I'd like to hear from you guys. What were the beginnings of your interest? How did you get involved in vintage baseball? And Jeff, why don't we start at the top? Why don't we start with you? Where did that interest begin?
Well, I've always been a student of baseball history, and I was actually reading the newspaper, reading the Wilmington News Journal, and there was an article in there about a club out of Maryland called the Eclipse Club of Elkton, Maryland, and it included like an email I could send an email to, and I sent an email to the guy, and he says, "Yeah, come on out for a practice or whatever." And just at that time, I had some car troubles and I couldn't get anywhere, and the next year, club was forming out of Delaware, and I got an email from another guy who says, "Hey, this guy said he had an email from you and that you live in Delaware. Would you be interested in joining our club?" And by this time, my transportation issue had cleared up, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll come down and see what this is all about." And found myself a great group of guys, and I've been going at it ever since.
Now, is this the same league that you were in when you first started? Are you still involved in the same association, or is it a different league that you're a part of now? Right.
Nope, same thing.
Same one. Okay. Same. So you're a veteran here of the league.
Well, not as much as Tom, but yeah, this past season was my 11th season playing vintage baseball.
Wow. Much respect. Very good. Well, Tom, let's go to you. Your background in vintage baseball. How did you get started?
I actually came across vintage baseball at the library. Saw a flyer for games at Old Bethpage Restoration, and always been a big fan of baseball. Honestly, at the time, didn't know a lot about the history of the game, and was interested and went down, watched the game, and then I decided they kind of pulled me out of the crowd and dressed me up and get involved at the Old Bethpage Restoration, and eventually joined the travel team, and then formed my own travel team, the New York Mutuals.
Now, when you went to that game to watch, did you have it in your head to eventually put on a uniform and play, or were you still on the fence? Like, was that the push that got you in?
I was very interested in playing. I was in a competitive softball league for a long time, didn't like the way it was going, and found that this was so much more interesting and a lot more gentlemanly, and not as competitive, even though the games are competitive. It wasn't as competitive as the softball league, which was getting a little old.
Sure. Okay. And Rick, that brings us to you. What is your story? How did you get involved in vintage baseball?
So back in 2013, I'd found a notice in the local newspaper about a team beginning, or a club beginning, in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is about 10 minutes from where I live. And it piqued my interest. I've always been a student of baseball and history, and the two together just seemed like right in my wheelhouse. And I thought to myself, I'll go to this meeting. I'll find out about this new club that's forming, and perhaps they'll let me keep score or umpire, or maybe I'll just go to a couple games and watch. It turned out that I was the second person to the meeting. And lo and behold, I became the vice president and the captain of the club and the starting catcher. So, wow. That kind of, I think that story is probably similar for a few of the clubs that started out. You just kind of walk in not knowing what to expect, and before you know it, you've got a uniform on, and it's really easy to pick up. I love that because I hadn't played competitive baseball in probably 20 years since I was a teenager. And just to be able to walk on the field without too much practice and sort of pick up the game, I feel like the vintage rules themselves lend themselves well to just being a great equalizer. People of all ages and abilities and backgrounds can play together, and it doesn't seem too awkward.
Sure, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience of the type of vintage baseball that you play. And I'm trying to look at this from the eyes of a new spectator like myself. I've never played vintage baseball. I've certainly learned a lot about it from doing this podcast, but I'd like to hear a little bit about your league, the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League. Can you give us some details of what a game in your league would look like for someone who, walked in off the road or decided, saw a flyer and they wanted to come see a game? Why don't we start off with talking about the field? What would the field look like for a new spectator that came to your game?
This is Tom speaking. The field is similar to a modern baseball field in the fact that it's 90 feet as far as the bases are concerned. Usually a grass field instead of a cutout infield dirt. The pitcher's distance would be 45 feet. The thing that you would notice difference is the home plate is a round plate. And those are the basic looks of what the field would look like.
Now, when we're talking about the outfield, are we talking about any sort of marker to show home run lines, or is it just as far as it goes, that's where it goes?
Yeah, this is Jeff speaking. Our fields are always we pick a large area with plenty of room, and it's hit it as far as you can and get as many bases as you can. There are no fences. There are no over the fence home runs. And in fact, we've done some historical research and have found that in the 1860s, when they had maybe an obstacle like a fence or something like that, they would call a ball that went over the fence only a double, because they didn't want people hitting the ball over the fence, because the balls were rare. You didn't have that many balls, so they wanted to discourage guys from hitting that ball over the fence. But we usually try and find a place that doesn't have a fence, and it's just hit it as far as you can and get as many bases as you can.
Right. And part of the reason I asked that is I remember when I was talking to the Central Valley Vintage guys, they were saying that some of the fields that they play on, I mean, there's forest in the outfield, so you've got guys, balls are hitting trees in the outfield. They're weaving through trunks to be able to get the ball back in play, to be able to throw it, and it's interesting some of the, I guess, the natural barriers that come up for teams sometimes that play, either by 1864 or 1882 rules.
Right. Jeff again. We had a field that we played at in Delaware City, Delaware, and we had a few trees in the far, far distance, probably almost 500 feet away. And it seemed like at least once every year, a deer would pop out of the woods, and there'd be a deer in far center field.
Wow.
And he'd look around for a little bit, and then he'd disappear again.
Well, one more spectator to the game, right?
There you go. I wonder how he can swing.
Well, he's got the antlers, so he's got half a bat right there. There we go.
There you go.
Well, guys, I'd love to hear about, so we've covered the field. Tell me about the uniforms. That's another interesting one. I've seen a lot of variation and, in terms of how strictly people follow the historical accuracy of that. What is the uniform situation like for your league and your clubs?
Hey guys, it's Rick here. I'll speak to this one a little bit. What I've found with some of the clubs is that they try to mimic, a traditional fireman's uniform or bib from the 1860s, and they'll sort of wear a shield on their chest. Mm-hmm. And apparently, this look was pretty common among firemen of that age. And so, I think some clubs, or a lot of the clubs, you'll see a shield on the chest, kind of covering where the buttons come down. But what other clubs also seem to do is just dress in very plain white uniform, plain white top and trousers. We tend not to wear our pants high so that the socks can be seen. You do see some clubs do that because it kind of looks neat. But if you were to be historically accurate to the 1860s, most clubs wore the long trousers all the way down to the shoe, much like some of the modern players do now, and they almost tuck them underneath the shoe. The Cincinnati Red Stockings kind of first, burst onto the scene. They were one of the first clubs to really kind of show the calf area and the Red Sox. So that's kind of where that was born.
Must have been a scandalous moment for the public.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the materials, guys, that your uniforms are made out of? Are you out there in the sun wearing wool, or are you a little liberal when it comes to the materials you use?
Tom speaking. I think most of the clubs are a little liberal as far as that, with a half wool. Speaking of my own team and some of the other teams I've seen, there's really only one team that I've seen come across that wears all wool. That's the Providence Grays, and it's itchy and it's hot. I've played in it once, so it's not easy to play in those, especially when you're playing in days that are 100 degrees or in the high 90s. So it's I think most clubs, speaking for myself, is a half blend of polyester and wool.
Just being my own club is one of the few clubs that does not wear the bib style. The Diamond State Baseball Club was a real club in 1865 and 66, and it lasted into the early 1870s. We have no photos of them. The only real description we have is that they wore black pants and blue with newsboy caps. So we have gone to Civil War sutlers, and we wear what they call a Jefferson shirt, which is something that would have been worn around the campfire during the Civil War time. And it's blue with sort of a buff colored checker pattern, which fits in with the colors that are on the Delaware state flag. So it works for us. And that shirt, fortunately, is 100% cotton, breathes really nice. We do wear black pants, so in the summertime that can be a problem, but the shirt breathes really nice, so we don't have a lot of overheating issues with that.
Now, is headwear common for all the teams that play in the league? Do you guys all have team-issued hats, or is that optional?
Tom speaking. Yeah, we have team-issued hats. Most of the pictures you see from the 19th century, in the 1860s specifically, you see players wearing hats. My team specifically, the New York Mutuals, was photographed. So I'm lucky enough to have a photo to go by. So we copied the 1870 club down to a T. Even though we play some 1864, mostly 1864 games, we'll wear the 1870 uniform, and we're able to pride ourselves in that it's an accurate uniform, exactly the way it was. Most clubs do not, like Jeff mentioned earlier, do not have a picture to go by, because you had to be a major club to be photographed at the time. So most of them have to go by what a description of the club is. But as far as the hats are concerned, most clubs, all clubs that I've seen, wear hats.
Okay, yeah, the historical recreation, that's I have to commend you for that. And that's got to be tough for some teams to have to create something out of nothing in terms of having a visual representation of what it looked like. But looking at some of the pictures on your website, the league website, I think you guys do a good job of recreating the time periods. So kudos to that. Why don't we move on to equipment? What type of equipment are players allowed to wear? What are they not allowed to use in terms of being able to supplement their play on the field?
Hey guys, it's Rick here. I think I'll take this one. The equipment is pretty basic. There isn't a lot of equipment needed other than a baseball bat and the baseball and bases. You won't really see any gloves, unless you're playing some of the later year rules. And, bats are wooden. Obviously, the specifications are fairly loose. I mean, you can't use a modern-looking bat with a cupped end or flashy logos on it. But there's a minimum diameter for the handle and a maximum diameter for the barrel. Mm-hmm. You won't really see curved tapers too often. You might see some funny bat handles on the bottom. The baseball is a leather ball. It's a lemon peel stitched ball, so it's not stitched like a modern baseball is. It's not a figure eight stitch. The leather is stitched at four corners, and that's called a lemon peel stitch. And the bases are they're sacks. I think traditionally they were filled with sawdust or sand. Ours, we use. I can speak for our club. We use like rubber chips that you'd find on a playground, and that seems to hold up pretty well. And as far as other equipment goes, I mean, if you're wearing glasses out there and they're prescription and they're the kind that, turn into sunglasses in the sun, I guess that's okay. But we try to refrain from letting guys wear sunglasses out there, because we want the look to remain authentic. And so we can't have guys playing out there with Oakleys. So we just try our best to make the look authentic. And there really isn't much other in terms of equipment out there. There's foul poles, perhaps, but those are usually flags placed out there at the left field and right field corners. And that's about it.
Sure. So with the authenticity factor that you're playing with, tell me a little bit about what the scoring patterns look like in your league. Are we talking about high scoring games? Are we talking about low scoring affairs? Where does that usually land for your teams, for your clubs?
This is Jeff speaking. This is actually a little bit of a mystery among vintage clubs. most of our games will usually be in like the winning team will be in the upper teens, maybe lower 20s, and the losing team will be somewhere around 10 to 15, something like that. But if you look at the actual scores, actual games from the 1860s, like the first game that Diamond State ever played, they won 69-28, and that was not uncommon. It was not uncommon to have games where the total between the two teams was over 100 runs. And so it's a little bit of a mystery why we play with replica equipment. We play with replica baseballs, replica bats. We play by the old rules, but we can't quite muster a 69-28. We played one team one time that was extremely inexperienced, and we scored 68 runs on them. I felt really bad for them, but that's literally the highest we've ever scored. Let's put it this way: that's the highest the Diamond State Club has ever scored in the 21st century. We can't seem to quite replicate those things. But when we play by some different rules, like when we play by 1866 rules, and a fly ball is no longer an out on one bounce, at least when it's fair, well, then all of a sudden the run scoring goes up. But it's still at most like maybe a 30-20 type of a game.
Yeah, that is interesting. I've never given that much thought. Is it the general healthiness of the players from then to now? That's interesting.
Yeah, the thought is that we've all grown up with baseball, and we know what we're doing. We know how to field balls, and we know things like relay plays and stuff like that. It's just ingrained in us. We've been doing it since we were 7 years old, and those guys didn't have that advantage. So I think the theory, at least, is that at least some of it can be explained by inexperienced fielding in the 1860s. That they would have been kicking the ball around a bit.
Sure. That's I like that. That's a good theory. That makes some sense. Now, with the high scoring games and the difference in terms of the field and the uniforms and the equipment, you guys must have that moment where you started playing and something happened. And you're like, wow, I'm playing 1864 rules baseball right now. Do any of you have any stories you'd like to share about maybe a difficult thing that happened or a funny thing that happened that kind of just highlights that difference in how the game is played?
Well, this is Tom. Speaking for me, not just when I first started, but throughout, you hit the ball well, or I hit the ball well, a line drive, and it would bounce up, and a fielder would catch it on a bound, one bound, and it's an out. And you're used to being able to tell off the crack of the bat that, hey, that's a hit every time. And so that's to me, that's always frustrating. I'm sure the other guys would agree on that. To hit a ball that's really well hit and well placed, even to have it bounce up on an unusual rocky field or a field that has strange bumps in it, and have it bounce up high so the fielder catches it and you're out, even though you hit the ball well.
This is Jeff speaking. I'll second Tom's. Yeah, that's frustrating. I call that it's a hit in every league but this one. I remember one of my first games, a big adjustment for me. I had been playing some softball. Big adjustment for me was just the 90-foot base paths. I hit a ball. It was in between two outfielders. I had stroked it pretty well. And about the time the ball lands and I can see it's between the outfielders, I'm almost at first base. I just take a second to look down and make sure I touch first base. And I was going to second because I figured that's between the outfielders. This was going to be a double. And next thing you know, I was out by 30 feet. So just the fact that it's 90-foot bases, that takes some getting used to. The other one is the foul tips. You can foul tip in this league just the tiniest hair to where sometimes you don't even realize you foul tipped it. And they'll call you out if the catcher catches it, even if the catcher catches it on one bounce. And that is so frustrating. I sometimes get into a slump because I do that multiple times in a row, and I'll joke about it, and I'll get up to bat the next time, and I'll be like, all right, Jeff, this time hit the ball forward. That's the idea.
Well, Rick, what about you? Any good stories from your beginning years with vintage baseball?
Yeah, I liked. I like Swampy's phrase. It's a hit in any other league. I have another one that I like to use, and probably a couple of the guys on my team are sick of hearing it, but I say that's a hit in any other century. Because, like, you hit this really good line drive, and you've seen major leaguers make that same hit right in the gap, and you get a quick outfielder and a big bounce, and forget it. You're out. So what I tried to do early on was I kind of made my living on, little dribblers or ground balls to third base. And so, you got to think about it. The third baseman's got to field it cleanly. He's got to pick it up, and he's got to throw it over to first base. And the first baseman's got to, catch it cleanly. And, if you have any type of speed, and I wouldn't say that I have a lot of speed, but I have a, middle of the road speed, usually I could beat those out, and, and I'd be sliding into first base. And so that's kind of how I started out, and that's kind of how I made my living the first couple of years. And I've never really been able to hit the ball far. So that was kind of how I made my hay early on, is you get on base and you steal bases, and just try not to hit the ball in the air, because if there's a good outfielder, chances are you're going to be out.
Way to adapt to the situation there, Rick. That's a good strategy. Jeff, I have to ask, with the 90-foot base paths, have you found a strategy that works for you? Do you just hammer the ball every time towards that deer, or what's your strategy?
My strategy is I developed a sort of a theory that I based off of the old Ted Williams theory, right? Ted Williams faced pitchers who were pitching off of high mounds, and Ted Williams' theory was the plane of the ball coming in. So when the pitcher's coming off a mound, the plane sort of coming down. And his theory was to meet the ball on the same plane, so your swing would be coming up slightly. Well, we don't have mounds. There were no mounds in the 1860s. And the pitching is underhand. And so the pitching comes in pretty flat. So my theory for a while was that the pitch comes in flat. I want my swing to be flat. I'm going to send it back out flat. If it happens to be right at a guy, I mean, I hope I've hit it well enough that it's like, you want to catch that? Good luck, pal. But if it's not right at a guy, that's going to go right through the infield, and it probably won't have enough of a hop that the outfielder will get under it. So my theory for a long time was pitches in flat, hit it back flat. That way there's not as much of a risk of a hop. Now, do I actually hit it back flat? Not all that often.
Jeff, you'll have to remind me next time I face you in pitching. I'm not going to throw it in flat.
You and Brad Shaw, man. Brad Shaw knows that, and he throws me moon balls.
I'm having you guys give up team secrets here. I didn't even think of that. Oh man. Okay.
Don't worry. I don't hit him back to the flat all that often as much anymore.
Guys, it's a good point that you bring up, because, modern strategies would not necessarily work if you had to step into this situation in terms of how you would approach batting and fielding. And I think you brought up good points where you have to adjust your game based on the realities of the rules that you're playing under. And so in both those cases, that's a great illustration of it's not a straight line, I guess you could say, between, picking up the aluminum bat and playing modern day baseball versus doing vintage baseball as we're talking about here. I want to switch over to asking you as a whole. We talked a little bit about your individual experiences. One thing that really struck me after looking at the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League website and researching some of your teams, I've had a chance to talk to some other vintage baseball leagues, and a lot of them are either just starting out, they're in their infancy, or they're looking to scale. They have a solid foundation underneath them, but they want to get more people participating, more people coming out to the games, and building out more clubs. From I believe my count was correct, the league that you gentlemen are a part of features 19 clubs. Is that correct?
I believe so.
And on top
that sounds
of that,
about right, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that was the number. And then on top of that, it seemed you had sponsorships from local businesses. It seems that you have a good attendance that you can expect, good local support. My question for you would be, we have other individuals listening to this podcast that participate in vintage baseball and maybe in situations where they want to start their own clubs or grow their leagues. Are there any things that you can think of, like factors that maybe have attributed to the growth of your league, the success of your league?
Personally, I think our league stands out and is successful enough because we maintain authenticity. It's so important to maintain that and represent the game as it was played as best as you can in 1864. So, if you're not true to that, true to the rules of 1864, eventually it'll come back and blow up in your face when somebody comes by that knows maybe a little more than you do. So the whole league itself prides itself on being authentic, and when we submit a new team to the league, that's one of the first things that are looked at.
I'll add on to that too. What Tom said. This is Rick. Historically accurate baseball is probably one of the most important things to our club. Also to have fun, to engage, to go and speak to the fans who are there and answer their questions. That's important to us. And I think it's in terms of sponsorship and those things, I think it's important that each club gets itself 3 or 4 people who can commit some time and energy to the betterment of the club. And I think that's kind of been the strength of the Brandywine Baseball Club, is that we have 4 or 5 guys usually that we elect as officers, and each one has a role. One person's role is to be the captain of the club and get a roll call before each game and make sure we have enough players to turn out and play. Another is the president or treasurer to make sure that there's enough funds to do the things we want to do. And then our club, one of my roles is I kind of handle marketing, and that's really just managing, social media, getting the word out there, participating in podcasts like this, speaking to the local newspapers, those types of things. So getting the word out there is important, so that, we can share this great game with people who may not have been to a vintage baseball or may not know what baseball looked like 150 years ago.
Yeah, this is Jeff speaking. All those things that Tom and Rick said are right. Part of what Rick was talking about, I think, is just community outreach. You have to remember that just like in the 1860s, these baseball teams were the pride of their city. In Delaware history, there's a small town called Delaware City where we played fairly frequently, and they had a team, the Atlas Baseball Club of Delaware City. And you didn't have guys who were more than 15, 20 miles away from Delaware City who played on this club. So these were teams that were sort of a civic pride thing. So we get some of our growth just from outreach in the community. Find a local park that's having a program. Find a local brewery or whatever else. And it's somewhere where they have a little bit of a property. You say, hey, this looks like a good spot. Do you think we could set up and maybe play here one time? And, you just keep at it. Keep going for the local parks and the local historical programs and stuff like that until you get a yes. And, you're going to get no 10 times, but keep trying. It sort of harkens back to that 1860s. We're the civic pride of this place, and we want to reach out to the community and join in the fun, basically. We want to show them a little more fun.
That's great advice from all of you. And I think that you really hit the nail on the head. It's about getting people interested in what's happening in their local areas. And I'd like to just kind of dovetail a question onto this for all 3 of you. How important do you think it is for vintage baseball to try and get some type of foothold with younger generations? And I'm not just talking about, college age to mid 30s types of players, but, kids, middle school, high school, how important do you think it is to get them interested in vintage baseball for not only the future of vintage baseball, but just a love for history and the sport in general?
I'll try to answer this one. This is Rick. I think that baseball is unique in a way. You could probably say this about some other sports, but I just feel like history and baseball go together so darn well that, kids pick up a basketball and they're shooting hoops in the driveway or something. And I just don't feel like it doesn't feel historic to me. But when you see a baseball game being played in a field between kids or adults, it feels like, it's like it goes together like I forget what the saying is. It feels so American, and so it's one of the rare things that makes me feel patriotic about this country sometimes, is that just baseball and history go together so well. And I think kids enjoy watching adults play a kid's game, and it looks a little different, but it's still baseball, and it's still something they recognize, and it still looks a lot of fun.
This is Jeff speaking. I just want to agree with everything Rick just said. I mentioned Delaware City, and we used to play quite frequently down there in Delaware City. And I would go down there for meetings with the folks who ran there was a park there. And I would meet with them, and it would be like middle of February. And then I'd swing by the field, and the spot where we played in Delaware City was just a big patch of grass, but it had a fence, like a backstop. So it was like sort of recognizable as a baseball field. And I'd be down there on a Tuesday in February, and I would catch a dad and a son out there playing ball. And it just blew me away. Like it's February. I mean, it was a particularly nice day that day, and it was like 65 degrees and warm. And I think it might have been President's Day, so the kid had the day off of school or something. But it just blew my mind. I'm here in February, and this dad and the kid are out there playing ball, and baseball is something that everybody can talk about. I went to this game with my dad. I went to that game with my grandfather. Uncles. It spans generations, and people compare the players today versus the players when I was growing up versus the players in my dad's era. It's so pervasive in baseball. And I agree with Rick, not in the same way. You see two kids shooting hoops in a driveway, and you ask them about Dr. J or something, and they'll be like, who? It's just not the same. I can't put my finger on why, but it's not. And I mean, I think we have some fairly younger guys on our club, and a couple of whom are sons of older guys we have on our club. But they're dedicated guys who come out fairly often and enjoy the game of vintage baseball. So I think if we just keep doing what we're doing, we'll find younger guys, and younger guys will get into it.
This is Tom speaking. So I'm speaking as one of those older guys. Thanks, Jeff. You're welcome. My three sons participate in vintage baseball now, but got involved. We usually play a game of rounders, hence the podcast, with the kids after the game to get them involved. And I've, in my 22 years of playing, have seen some of these kids actually grow up to play vintage baseball. They'll say, "Oh, remember I played rounders with you, so-and-so, and so many years ago." And all of a sudden they're playing vintage baseball, which of course makes me feel terribly old. But it's one way to get the kids involved. They enjoy watching, but they want to go up there and take a swing too. So giving the swing at the end sometimes helps with that.
Yeah, as someone, I spent 12 years in education as a teacher and a principal, and I see with the kids, it was always a concern for me as a baseball fan. It just seemed like more and more every year as kids came up, especially through middle school and high school, there just wasn't that interest in baseball anymore. It was more with the faster paced sports. And, I would try and link in baseball into a lot of my subjects because I was a history teacher. And, when kids realize just how interwoven baseball is with American history and I think just the nuances of the game, like they do get interested in it. And, I think it's all of our jobs, not just vintage baseball, but anybody that loves the sport to, I guess, impress upon kids. And I don't know what's causing that gap nowadays, but I think people, when they're exposed to the sport, even just playing it, like you said, after watching a game, it sparks an interest in them and it starts to grow. And that's what we need to do on all levels, just to ensure the continued popularity of baseball, because, the trends are not encouraging, I guess you could say, in terms of generational interest. So, it's just something I like to see what vintage baseball is doing. And I commend you guys on having, I guess, an ear to that, and vintage baseball, I think, has a role to play in baseball's popularity overall.
Yeah. And if I could go up just a little bit more, this is Jeff speaking. I think that sort of like the organized, like the Little League baseball, a lot of it is, do you have the right bat? Do you have the right shoes? Do you have the right, and then you get into travel clubs and it gets expensive, and can your parents afford it and all that stuff. I think vintage baseball has an opportunity there, because with our game, you show up, it's cheap. There is no equipment. You just, have a uniform. Our uniforms are very inexpensive, and you can wear it for years. And ours is, it's like a simpler game than what a lot of the kids are exposed to when they're exposed to organized baseball, quote unquote.
Yep, that's a great point. Expense is an issue, and not only that, I think vintage baseball really gives you a chance to show, a little bit more of your natural skill in a way, because you're not depending on as much equipment to be able to get the job done. I mean, you're palming that ball, you're swinging that heavy piece of lumber. It's a physically, I don't want to say demanding, but it certainly, it requires technique. It requires you to really, have an ability, I guess you could say, or to hone an ability would be a better way to say it. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break for the 7th inning stretch. Stay tuned for more conversation with the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
And welcome back to the show, everybody. Let's continue our conversation with the guys from the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League. So, guys, I would love to jump a little bit deeper into the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League and learn a little bit more about your clubs. I think one of the most interesting things I find, at least when I'm talking to vintage baseball clubs, is the stories of how baseball came to your areas and, some of the nuances of what led to official clubs being formed, and I guess where we pick up the story today and looking at history. So if you could share a little bit about, your location, how the team got maybe a specific name or the colors or the logos they chose, just kind of a background to how baseball came to your part of the country. Jeff, I'd like to start with you in Delaware, the Diamond State Baseball Club. Can you give us a mini history lesson on the origins for you?
Sure. Ours is actually fairly well documented. The Diamond State Baseball Club was the first baseball club formed in the state of Delaware. I say that I think the Patuxent Club, also of Wilmington, formed about 5 days later. This was October of 1865. We're pretty sure that some sort of bat and ball game, whether it was town ball or rounders or something like that, would have been played in like social clubs, among just everyday citizens. And let's be honest, among more aristocratic folks, aristocratic folks had time on their hands and could stand to play games, but they weren't specifically organized to be a baseball club. But in 1865 in October, some Wilmington attorneys organized the first baseball club, the Diamond State Baseball Club. Delaware has been known as the Diamond State since Thomas Jefferson gave the nickname to the state. And they played the first known game in Delaware, winning that thing 69-28, as I said. They played against a thing called St. Mary's, which was a sort of a boarding school. It was like in between a high school and a college. It of course went defunct not long after the war, actually, and it's about the early 1870s. But then the Diamond State got themselves, shall we say, a couple of ringers for 1866. Although Andrew Gibney was on the club in 1866, Andrew Gibney was later on the famous 1869 Nationals Club that took a Western swing and went undefeated. And then they also, we believe, Gibney brought on a young man out of Philadelphia by the name of Fergie Malone. Fergie Malone went on to great fame with the Athletic Club of Philadelphia as a catcher. And a few years later, in 1871, was the first year there was really a real league of baseball players. I mean, even though you have the famous 1869 Cincinnati Reds, it's not until 1871 that, like, there's rules. You have to play all the other teams. You have to play them at home and play them at their city. So it's really the first year that there is a league, so to speak. And that was the year the Philadelphia Athletics won the league, and Fergie Malone was the catcher that year. And but in 5 years prior, he had been on the Diamond State Baseball Club, and they won all the games against other Delaware clubs and were the champions of Delaware, including when they played the Delaware City Atlas, who I have mentioned a couple of times before. They played the Delaware City Atlas in June of 1866. It was a big deal. The Atlas were the quote-unquote champions of the Delaware at that time, and the Diamond State beat them 32-13, I think it was. And people remembered that game for years, and the trophy ball was kept for years. And our team historian and the first team president of our club, John Metcalf, had been on the search for years to find out where the ball was. And a couple of years ago, we found out that the ball had actually been sent to the Baseball Hall of Fame. I have touched that baseball in my hands, a ball from 1866, which is kind of an amazing experience.
Jeff, is there still well, this is kind of a difficult question now that I think of it. I don't know if you have any insight into this. Is Delaware still a kind of a hotbed for baseball prospects nowadays? It seems like love for the sport runs deep in your state.
It does. We've had a few major leaguers. Brett Oberholzer was a pitcher for a while. Kevin Mensch is a Delaware guy. Went to the University of Delaware. His major league career is now over. And then there's the story of Paul Goldschmidt, who was born in Delaware, and his parents moved away to Texas when he was like 2 or 3 years old. So he doesn't remember anything about Delaware, but he's a famous major leaguer.
Got it. Okay. Just kind of thinking about, I've learned a lot about Delaware's roots here, and just wondering if that rings true today. So, and who knows, maybe Goldschmidt, picked up, a ball in his crib or something and realized, hey, in his infant brain, baseball is for me.
He swung a plastic bat and busted the family TV or something.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, there's always an origin story, right?
Right.
Tom, let's go ahead and go to you. Tell us a little bit. You represent the Mutual Baseball Club, which is based in New York. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin story of the sport in your area?
Yes. Well, I'm lucky enough, like I said earlier, to have a lot of documentation as far as the Mutual Baseball Club. But they started in 1857 as an outbreak of the Mutual Hook and Ladder Company #1. And many of the employees had jobs, and I'll put that in quotes, for the hook and ladder, but they were basically baseball players first. They played their games in Hoboken and in Brooklyn, and eventually in Brooklyn, compared to our modern club, which we play on Long Island. But they went on to win the national championship in 1868 and 1870. We base our club on the 1870s uniforms. The way we came up with the colors of the uniforms, which I believe you asked, is the club is mentioned in many articles as being called the Green Stocking. So right away we figured out green because we're looking at black and white photos and trying to figure out what their color is. It wasn't easy, but it's easy to tell it's a white uniform with dark piping. And the word green stockings is mentioned several times. So that's how we became green as far as our color and our uniform is concerned. We are one of the first clubs to have a betting scandal way back in 1867. They were we were known to play some teams that weren't what I would say major league quality as much as we may play a local team, and the Mutuals were a top-notch club. They would play them, and if the betting odds were right, they might throw a game. They did throw a couple of games. 3 players got ejected for a season, but there weren't a lot of rules as far as betting was concerned back then. That's basically the history of our club. We went all the way to 1876, and in 1876 we were part of the National League, the first 8 teams to be in the National League. So had there not in 1876, we didn't finish the season. So the National Association threw them out of the league. Had it not happened, instead of rooting for the Mets, you might be rooting for the Mutuals. But yeah, so obviously a mistake on their part by not finishing the season because of financial difficulties. And that's the history, a very brief history of the Mutuals.
So that brings us to Rick. Rick, tell us a little bit about your club. You're from the Brandywine Baseball Club based in Pennsylvania. Share some of your origin story.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of documentation about the origins of our club. And as baseball became very popular in Philadelphia and some of the other metropolitan cities, some of the, as you go a little further beyond those cities, you will find local towns to have their own clubs. So in 1865, in September, right around this time of year, the Brandywine Baseball Club played their first game. And what we do know is that the club actually remained in existence right up until the 1919. So I think we have one of the longer histories of some of the other vintage baseball clubs. And they did particularly well against other local clubs, against other towns within our county. But as soon as, a big club like the Athletic Club of Philadelphia came in, we usually got clobbered by those bigger teams. But baseball was quite popular in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and there's many players who played for Brandywine who went on to play either in the major leagues or for other clubs. So I feel like our club was kind of a stopping ground or just a stepping stone for some players, almost like a minor league club. That's kind of how I view it, for players as they kind of moved up the ranks or went on to bigger and better things. So, I think Westchester, Pennsylvania has a pretty good history of baseball. We may not have the success and the prestige of some of the other clubs and cities, but we were definitely a part of the story. And so we got some articles from the Chester County Historical Society, and we see the Brandywine Baseball Club is mentioned in many of these articles. And so there's accounts of games that were played, and there were some betting scandals. There was criminal activities. There were fights. And so all this stuff is just kind of tells the story of our club. And so we're continuing to research and try to find more of those fun stories to sort of weave into our current day activities. For instance, we did find a story that a cat was buried underneath home plate as a way to curse one of the opponents. And so we tried to do this. We didn't get a real cat, but we brought a stuffed cat to one of our games and sort of put it behind home plate to see if that would help us win. And it didn't really help us that day, but it was a fun story to tell, and everyone got quite a kick out of it. So there is history to our club. There's a couple of links to Herb Pennock, who is a Hall of Fame pitcher. I believe his father played for the Brandywine Club at one point, and some of the other players on Brandywine discovered how good Herb was and helped him sort of, hone in on his pitching skills for his very storied career.
This is Jeff speaking. I just wanted to add one quick thing about the Diamond State Club. Is the Diamond State Club didn't last too long. 1872. The current iteration of the Diamond State Club has far outlasted the first one. We reformed in 2009, and we're still going strong. And the original Diamond State Club was like 6 or 7 years.
Wow. So yeah, reaching across generations here. That's very interesting, Jeff. And with all three of what you guys said about your clubs, and with so many other vintage baseball clubs I've talked to, we're talking about the origin stories here. With so many vintage baseball clubs, the origin stories of baseball as we know it today started with these groups, and just to see that progression, it's just, baseball really owes where it is today to a lot of these clubs. And that really brings me to my next question, gentlemen. In your minds, part of what needs to be done is marketing for vintage baseball. Your pitch to people listening to the show, people that have never had any interaction with vintage baseball, why should fans, players, spectators support and participate in this style of sport in vintage baseball?
This is Tom speaking. I think it's important. It's a simpler time, a simpler period in our history, and I think to be able to keep part of history alive and show people what it's like, and to become part of that is exciting and interesting. So I think some who's interested in joining would be attracted to the fact that they're actually recreating a piece of history, even though we don't know the outcomes of our games. Recreating a part of history that they can show people and research and learn things from, actually being able to have living history. It's a lot easier to learn about history if you can actually experience it somehow. And this is one way to experience it.
Yeah, this is Rick from the Brandywine Baseball Club. I think it's a great way for, younger generations to understand the origins of this game that their fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers probably played at one point. And so I think that's always great. It's also a good way to get involved with the community. As a player for this club, when I moved to Pennsylvania in 2003 and lived in suburban Philadelphia, I never really felt like I was part of a community until I joined this baseball club. And so when I put on the uniform, I identify with my local area now. I feel like now I'm part of the history, I'm part of the story, and I'm part of the community. So it's been pretty special for me in that way. And I think if others could experience that once in a while, I think, the world and the communities we live in would be a much greater place.
Yeah, this is Jeff speaking. I mean, I think I kind of mentioned it before. Our game is a little simpler. It's less equipment. It's less specific things you need to have. You just show up and there's a uniform. Yeah, there's a uniform to buy, but it's not that much. And then there's like a little membership fee, but it's not that much. And so many times we just focus on getting people to come out to the games because we figure a visitor becomes a volunteer, because we try and keep the games, we try and keep it historically accurate above everything else, but we also try and keep it fun. And when people see, that we're having fun on the bench and joking around, then all of a sudden they want to join. And then they're like, what's this about if it's a bounces once, it's an out? What's going on with that? And we get someone to explain it to them. And next thing you know, they're like, I wonder if I could join that. So it's just a bunch of fun, and the community helps us out and we help the community out. and it makes for a great time.
One more thing I'd like to add. This is Rick from the Brandywine Club. I feel like through my experience, I've probably met people I wouldn't have normally met had I not joined the club. I've been to places I probably would not have gone to had I joined this club. And so the overall experiences I've been afforded I'm really appreciative of. And if baseball and history is a vehicle for that, then it's really perfect for me. So I'm just happy to be part of it. I'm happy to share with other people and hopefully get them involved. And you can usually spot the one person in the crowd with a twinkle in their eye that, wow, this is so cool. This is really interesting to me. It's history. It's baseball. It's so accessible. It's free in most cases. So that's really important to me. Just the experience has been, I feel like I get more out of it than I've put in. So I have no problem putting in time and effort to make our club better or to make the sport better or to teach people about it.
And this is a great place for us to have a call to action, gentlemen. You know, to our listeners, if there's anybody that lives in the Northeast who's interested in getting involved with the club, with any of the clubs that we've spoken to, you know, with the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League in general, or just wherever you are, you know, in the country, or we even have some listeners outside the country, to get involved with vintage baseball, you know, and to be a part of this living history piece. But specifically in the Northeast, guys, I'd like to give you the chance to provide just a brief overview of information of how people could, you know, take action on this if they have interest, and maybe give one of you guys a call to join your club or to get involved in this league. Rick, I figured I'd go to you with this question. How can people get involved in vintage baseball in your area, in the Northeast, in the Mid-Atlantic area, if they're interested in participating?
Yeah, so there's a website you can go to for the Mid-Atlantic Vintage Baseball League, MAVBBL.com, I believe, or it might be .org. I'm sorry, but if you just
.com.
Okay, it's .com.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, if you just go on there, you can perhaps find a team that's close to you. Most clubs in our league have a Facebook page or a website of their own. So I feel like if you just search vintage baseball in your particular area, you'll find a club that's hopefully near to you. And if there isn't one, and if you'd like one, and if you feel like you could get 10 or 15 people interested in it, you should start one. And I would suggest you go to your local historical society or library and just kind of do some research and find out if there was a club in your town. And if there was, perhaps you could start one in their namesake. And we're always looking for new members. And so, you can go to our website. It's brandywinebbc.org. And we also have a Facebook page and Instagram and Twitter and all that. So we're pretty easy to find. But most clubs do have websites and emails and Facebook pages where you can reach out to them, and I'm sure most of them are willing to take new members on.
I'm just going to second everything that Rick said. The Diamond State Club also should be pretty easy to find. We're www.diamondstatebaseball.com. We try to keep our website up to date, recent scores and all that fun stuff. We also have a Facebook and a Twitter and an Instagram, or diamondstatebbc@gmail.com is our email address. There's no such thing as too many players. No such thing.
Agreed.
If we had 20 guys show up to a game, I would lose my mind. You can have a list of 20 guys and you say, hey, the game is Sunday at 1:00. Who can make it? There are weeks during the summer where, people have busy lives and you'll struggle to get 9 guys out. So if you can have a list of 25 instead of 20, great. If you can have a list of 30 instead of 25, better. There's no such, and we've certainly had guys who are very committed to the club and have just fallen away. Life just gets a little too busy sometimes. You have family problems or you move away or something like that. And so you have guys who are committed to the club, but they have to give it up. Life happens sometimes. So there's no such thing as too many players. Always need new blood.
This is Tom speaking. As far as we're concerned, I think first off to say you could contact any one of us three, and if you're looking to start a team, we'll help you start a team. You don't have to start from scratch. If you want, we can help you. We can even help you with research. Sometimes the idea of starting a team could be a little overwhelming, especially when you hear some of of this podcast that we're talking about and how into it we are. But we can certainly help you with it. Personally, if you're in the Long Island area and you're interested in playing, you can easily contact me at bigbat@nymutuals.com or check out our website at nymutuals.com. But I know any one of us would be happy to help you start a team if you're looking to do that.
And to our listeners, I will make sure to include each club's information as well as the league information. And if there's any personal information that would like to be shared by the gentleman on the show, that I will put that in the show notes to make it easier for you to take that step and get involved, or at least learn about how you can get involved. So with that said, guys, it has been a great conversation with you today. I wish you and all of your clubs the best, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
And thank you to you for tuning into today's episode. I really appreciate the support. Remember, share the podcast with a friend or leave a review on the podcast app of your choice. Every star, every review helps us get in front of new listeners. And remember, there are only two seasons, winter and baseball.